Hello, and welcome to The Art of the Possible. My name is Antonia Collins. I am a stage manager, an educator, and an educational consultant. But for the next 2 days, more importantly, I'm going to be your host. Today, the National Centre for Performing Arts launches The Art of the Possible. It's an initiative that's specially designed for those who live and work in the technical arts in India. This initiative is for the people who come together to create amazing theatre who are mainly unseen. Lighting designers, sound designers, lighting technicians, sound technicians, video designers, people who rig lights, staging, scenic artists, painters, builders, and stage managers and production managers and event managers. The list literally goes on, and most people don't even know that we exist. Over the next 2 days, we're going to have some really exciting discussions with brilliant artists from India and across the world. There are going to be panels and roundtables, as well as a networking event that will be really special, and I'm going to tell you about that later. The roundtables are really important. We really need to hear from you. We really want to know about the issues that are affecting you in your work life. Issues such as pay and working conditions, contracts, credits, and gender parity in your industry in India. These are really important to you that we hear from you. But we don't want to just hear the issues. We need to talk about how we can move these matters forwards and create real momentum into our future plans to build this into a national initiative on specialist professional development, upskilling, support, networking, and transversal skills. So what's happening over the next 2 days? Well, let me tell you, the full schedule is on the website, and you can follow on all our social media for regular updates as well. And if you've not registered on the website, if you're watching us on YouTube, register on the website so that you can watch along with the rest of the sessions and interact with us. If you've registered for the weekend and you've not received any Zoom link emails, then check in your spam box, because sometimes they have gone in there. And there are different links for the roundtables and the mixer, so look after them. Now, I'll be honest, there may be some difficult conversations that we're going to have over the next 2 days, but we will try our very best to handle them with sensitivity and understanding. Right, so this session is being live streamed. Let's look at what's coming up. Can I have my first slide, please? Okay, so here's the schedule for today, and it's all available on the website, and you can see all the links there. But obviously we're in this opening session and we have a very special guest, which I'm really looking forward to hearing her talk about her love of theatre. Then we've got a session about collaborative practice. And then we've got the roundtable on pay and working conditions. And then we've got the networking event. And like I say, I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit later on. Next slide, please. Then tomorrow, we've got a really great session about designing internationally. And then we've got a roundtable on contemporary working practice. Then we've got a closed roundtable that's about production arts for women. And this is an event that is specifically for people who identify as female. And again, I'll mention that one later on. And then we've got a closing where we're going to talk about how we move this initiative forward, because this is literally just the start. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, and at any point, if you want to contact us with any concerns or thoughts or observations, you can email us here at this email address, aotp@ncpamumbai.com. Thank you for the slides. The themes of this symposium are community, create, collaborate. And those words, and specifically that order, was really chosen with care. Because when we start building a community, then we can create and collaborate together. We grow better when we grow together. Now, to tell us more about the Art of the Possible, I would like to introduce you to Bruce Guthrie, Head of Theatre and Film at the NCPA.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first online symposium of the Art of the Possible. In politics, the art of the possible was a phrase that's used to demonstrate pragmatism over idealism. Politics is a matter of creating achievable goals and implementing them in the real world. Our interpretation in the arts of that phrase is somewhat slightly different. We believe in creating the ideal when pragmatic circumstances. This is an idea we work with in live performance daily. Often we must make do with conditions that are far from ideal, making something out of nothing, spinning straw into gold. Artistic and live events community needs to come together and work collaboratively to elevate our work here in India. It's also about skill sharing and problem solving. The best idea in the room should always win. Our goal is to get as many brilliant minds together working for our common interest. All ideas are welcome, and all methods are valid, but some methods may get the same results with greater ease and efficiency. Because whether you hike, take a cable car or a helicopter to get up the mountain, we want to be able to get up that mountain easier and find as many different ways as possible together. We're backed up with an extensive report that the NCPA commissioned ArtX to conduct in 2021, supported by the British Council. A series of initiatives, a series of interviews, focus groups and roundtable discussions were held with working performers and professionals across India. The report highlighted how disenfranchised those who work in live events feel and what the specific problems are. We need to have a greater presence on the world stage and to provide opportunity and nurture those with talent and ambition to excel in technical theatre and design. Our response to the report is the Art of the Possible programme. I would now like to welcome Shankalita Chakraborty to talk about the British Council's contribution to arts and culture here in India.
Thank you, Bruce. Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us from across the country at the Art of the Possible Symposium. I'm Shankalita Chakraborty, and I'm the Arts Manager with the British Council. I worked very closely with the National Centre for the Performing Arts, Mumbai, over the past year, and have seen this project shape up beautifully under the able leadership of my colleagues Bruce and Padma. British Council's strategic focus and vision for the arts sector is to be an arts and culture catalyst to strengthen creative expression, exchange and enterprise through trusted partnerships between India and the UK. Through our work, we want to create opportunities for artistic and cultural exchange, support thriving artists, cultural professionals, and creative economies, and respond to local and global challenges through art and culture. And we cannot do so without the support and meaningful engagement of our partners. British Council has led a significant body of work in skill and capacity development across our programs in arts, education, and English. Our Festivals for the Future program is a comprehensive multi-year program that is aimed at strengthening the creative economy of India's art and culture festivals in partnership with the UK. And as part of this program, we are delighted to be supporting NCPA for the Art of the Possible in driving systemic change through upskilling, leadership development, and international networks for theatres and designers and managers who work in the live art performance and event sector. The Art of the Possible website is a milestone towards creation of a community of designers, technicians, and managers like Antonia said, who's always been working tirelessly behind the scene, where they can come together and learn from sector leaders and experts, and of course from each other. And it will also serve as a repository of useful resources for this community. It's in synergy with the Festivals from India platform that we've launched this year. This digital platform is designed to showcase hundreds of arts and culture festivals across art forms, locations, and languages. It brings together festival professionals, curators, designers, and managers to network, collaborate, and upskill themselves by using free learning resources that are available on the platform. I wish very best all the success to Art of the Possible. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome Rashmi from ArtX. Her team undertook the original research for us about the sector, and she will now talk us through the findings. Over to you, Rashmi.
Thank you so much, Shankalita, and thank you for the continued support that the British Council has shown towards the arts and both these projects that you spoke about. May I please have the presentation on? Just a reminder, if you want to view the presentation with all its clarity, I recommend that you make your screen full, go on full screen to be able to see it clearly. Before I dive into the insights, I just do want to mention that I think NCPA showed remarkable leadership in commissioning a research study of this sort, which actually gives, I would say, is feet to the collective wisdom of theatre makers in this country. A lot of what we unearthed in the report resonated with the community, and we had a lot of comments from the community saying, oh, we knew that this was true, but it's great to know that it is true. And I hope some of what we share with you today resonates with you, and we'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on what you found surprising. Can we please move on to the next slide? So to start with, what were the objectives of the study? We broadly looked at 5 objectives. And if I break that down further, there were 2 very clear themes. One being, what is the sector composition like? What does the theatre sector constitute of? What are the peculiarities of the way we work in India within this community that informs the way technicians, managers, designers are able to do the work that they do? And the second theme that you'll see here is specifically with respect to the Art of the Possible project is what are the specific skill gaps and needs of the community aligned with how do they learn? What are the learning behaviors and preferences? And this is the kind of knowledge that would potentially help NCPA shape the program that they intend to create and start. If you look at the first 2 objectives, which was providing a contextual overview and pathways of entry, it allows us to understand where we are coming from and why is it that we cannot always compare ourselves to the way theatre sectors across the world operate. So it would allow us to speak from both the strengths and weaknesses of our positions. Next slide. To give you a bit of a background of the kind of people we spoke to, there were about 10 subdivisions of careers that we looked at within the technical professionals and what we call the transversal skills landscape, which is the transferable skills landscape. And this cut across light, sound, video, set, and costume, both design, management, and of course, technology as well. We spoke to about, I think approximately we involved about 200 respondents in the study. Can we move on to the next slide? Which included a diverse methodology comprising both primary research and secondary research. For the uninitiated, primary research is data that we directly gather on the field, which means we can rely on that data a lot more than the data that was available online or other sources such as journals, newspapers, that we can use to sort of understand what is going on. So the primary research included focus group discussions, one-on-one interviews, and a survey as well, while the secondary research, of course, comprised of looking at our journal articles, whatever current research was available, all of the newspaper articles that were there. And this is what has informed the study, the insights of the study that we have for you. Next slide. So the key insights. Let's start with, next slide, the sector composition and career pathways. What does the cultural sector, particularly the theatre sector, looks like in India? And how do people who want to make a career in this space enter the sector, particularly, like I mentioned, people in the technical skills landscape? Next slide. We all know this, that we're an informal sector. The proper definition of an informal sector is a sector that does not pay taxes and that is not managed under regulation. So in that sense, it's not a fully informal sector because, as you know, a lot of theatre actually ends up paying taxes. They are registered as organizations. But when we're talking about informality here, we're talking about the fact that there is no overarching policy that frames the evolution and growth of the sector. In fact, culture as an area, as a mandate in the country, is split across, aside from the Ministry of Culture that has an arm's-length funding model, it's split across 14 different central level ministries. And if you break that down into state level, it gets even more complex. So it's one of the biggest arguments we have is whether should we or should we not have a culture policy, but what framework of a policy can you develop when culture actually is cut across departments such as tourism, tribal affairs, minority affairs, culture, of course, industries. So it's very, it has its sort of fingers in several pies. How do you create a unilateral approach to policy making? And at the same time, even that impacts the work that we do in the field of theatre on the ground. A lot of the respondents that we spoke to told us that the first exposure to theatre happened at the school or college level, and that becomes a very, very critical pathway for entry into the sector. The passion is sparked at this level. And that is where they also get their first opportunity to work within the field. And hence, a lot of the learning occurs on the job because there are very few intensive training programs that exist. A very, very small minority has taken formal training, but in most likelihood, they have had to resort to international programs if they can afford it. So otherwise, a lot of the learning, a majority of the learning happens on the job. We also mentioned that the informal nature of the sector leads to not being able to afford good quality and education, particularly because you don't have specific training under these areas in this country, so you have to move abroad. And whatever does exist in India tends to be one-off courses. There aren't really full-fledged programs that address the entire universe of making work across theatre, events, and festival production, cutting across some of these spaces as well. Next slide. We also asked them the question about what does your career portfolio look like? You would like to know that, you would want to know that if are they only working in theatre or are they working in other spaces? It tends to be quite mixed. So you will see that a majority of the respondents cut across 2-3 disciplines. So if you're working in theatre, it's very likely that you'll also work in education, events, and film, or at least 2 out of the 3. Theatre on its own is not a sustainable career. So the need for financial sustainability compels technical professionals to have a very diverse career portfolio, also thereby increasing the risk of moving away from core theatre because of its lack of sustainability. Next slide. Before we move into this, just a thread drawing from the sector pathways and the career pathways, the sector overview. You're talking about an informal sector, you're talking about lack of formal training programs, and you're talking about relatively on-the-job learning that you're dealing with. Aligning to that, we needed to understand, therefore, how does someone in the sector learn? How do they work? How do they learn? So if you design something around this kind of learning, what do you take into account from their behaviors or their propensity to work and learn in a particular way that can enable the program to be successful and resonate in the right way with the community? Next slide. So the first obvious question was that, how does learning actually happen on the, within the sector? And of course, it was learning by observation and learning from peers. So breaking down learning on the job, how do you even learn on the job? Is someone giving you a template and saying, hey, check this out, read and come to, the stage tomorrow, the rehearsal room tomorrow? Or are you reading a book before starting? So like, what are the specific modalities of this learning on the job? So it was basically learning via observation and learning from peers, which is very critical because when you're talking about adult learning, and adult learning approaches tend to be very different from learning approaches developed for children. You have to look at the way in which people learn best. Some people learn by books, some people learn by observation. So if you are talking about people working in this space, and if learning on the job is the dominant way to gain knowledge, learners are better with observation, and they may potentially be resistant to too much academic learning. And therefore, thinking about the balance of the program, how much of theory do you give in a program, and how do you communicate the theory to someone who's trying to learn within this space? Next slide. We also asked that why would you want to learn? What is your motivation to learn? And the 2 key motivations, which is honestly any curriculum designer's purest joy moment, is when you hear these words, I love the craft and therefore I want to learn that. And I'm really curious, I want to learn more about this. Not just because I want to make a career. And we all know that we're in theatre because we're passionate about theatre. And that comes across as the 2 main motivations to learn. This was another interesting insight that came through is that because it's such a resource-starved sector, and because it's not fully sustainable, you have to learn multiple skills in order to survive. So you may have heard the term, acha aap light karte ho to sound bhi kar do, or, can you help with this part as well? So you often are forced to multitask because you're given multiple tasks to handle at the right at the beginning of your career as well, and sometimes even later. So this calls for you to learn quickly and learn fast. And it creates a lot of variety and width of learning, but not necessarily the depth that you need to create a certain quality and aesthetic in the way that we potentially could take the work. It also means that there is often lack of standardization because you don't have a structured education system supporting this. Everything is happening on the job. There may or may not be templates, and hence the standards differ from one venue to another, from one production house to another, from one city to another. So contexts actually determine the structures of what is going on, not standards. Next slide. Because of those contexts of learning behaviors and work mechanisms, there are very specific skill gaps and needs that we've identified. I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about gaps and needs. A gap is actually the difference between what is the current situation and what you want the situation to be. So the difference between the desired state, which is where you want to be, and where you are currently. So what we typically do is we do a gap analysis. We understand what are the current gaps that are there. Where are you currently and where you need to be? And then there is a needs assessment where we look at, but what is the need of the overall ecosystem? And how can these be balanced out within the context of skills? Next slide. One of the things, areas that came through very clearly when it comes to where are you at in terms of your skill level, practically everyone spoke about the fact that there's very limited formal qualification. I know I'm sounding like a broken record repeating the same thing, but let me break that down for you. What we mean by underqualified in this case is that you may not even have the basic level of qualification that you need to do the work in the way that it should be done. And it has a ripple effect across the board. So one example is the fact that when you're working with light, you're working with science. And if you don't have a background in science, that kind of, and you'll see the next line, knowledge gaps were cited as the major precursor to skill gaps. If you don't understand the science behind that particular area of work that you're doing and everything that you've learned has been on the job, it could potentially create an issue with health and safety. So for us to talk about qualification, we sort of expand that notion to talk about why qualification, what does the qualification give you? And that base knowledge level becomes extremely critical for professionals who are in the space to be able to be more innovative, more creative, more hands-on, and more responsive to what the needs are of that production. And hence, therefore, creating a much stronger clash of creative ideas within the team as well. So it's not just a professional that's executing what the director is saying, but is bringing their creativity and their artistry into the process. And that is strengthened by certain qualifications that inform that kind of thinking. We also heard from the respondents that there aren't enough spaces to learn. And this is not just education spaces, but it's also pedagogical peer learning platforms. So are they, like the symposium that we have today, how many of these symposiums happen? What about conferences? What about journal articles on the craft? We often talk about, a director's perspective. Where is the light designer's perspective or the sound technician's perspective? Where are those narratives documented and where can we learn from each other? That gap was specifically highlighted by the respondents. Language, as we know, we're anyways talking about a country with 22 official languages and about 1,400 mother tongues. Within this complexity, what are the languages where knowledge hubs are already existing and where knowledge hubs can be translated? Typically, it's English, which already limits a huge number of people that want to learn on their own. So knowledge is not often produced as vociferously in languages other than English in this region as it should be. And hence communication skills becomes a definitive gap as well as need in order for people to be able to figure out how to learn on their own from available resources as well. Next slide. Of course, lack of health and safety protocols is something that we heard about a lot, but also what we also heard about was a very gendered experience in learning as well. So someone who's coming from well, as a woman, your ability to learn on the job, depending on where you are, which part of the country you are, does get limited. So patriarchy does end up playing a role, especially in technical skills and transversal skills production. And this is something we'll unpack a little more during the symposium, but just wanted to highlight that. When in the survey, we asked very specific questions about how do you, what are the most important, areas for you to look at when it comes to training. And as you will see, health and safety or safety and security protocol topped the list, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. A good thing because it needs to be on top, and a bad thing because it means it's a disaster waiting to happen if it's not addressed immediately. Gender sensitivity training was the second one, and ethics was the third one. This is aside from other areas of training, which is the knowledge gaps and everything that we've spoken about. So this is the other sort of what we call not necessarily soft skills, but like the areas of training which are not typically looked at as artistry within the work. So not sound and light design, but more to do with making other things work in a way that allow your production to happen safer, better, and well-rounded. Next slide, please. We also asked them what would prevent you from accessing this learning and training. So the three priority areas identified were high course fees, speaking to the lack of financial sustainability within the sector, location, inability to travel, especially as a freelance. Technically, these tend to be gig economy workers. So you're working as freelancers, and if you've committed to one production, how do you take time out from that and go to another city to learn? And lack of time. Next slide. This was an experiment for us. We knew that we wouldn't get robust data out of it, but that gave us an impetus to think about what more can we do. We asked respondents to tell us how much do they earn from theater, fully knowing that we would not get the full picture because the career portfolios tend to be so diverse. So we asked them, typically, depending on where you're coming from, what would constitute to be a low budget, mid budget, and high budget production. And on that basis, how much do you earn in a low budget, mid budget, and high budget production? Like I said, it was an experiment, data point for us to be able to look at. But when we actually put this out in our test group to test some of this data, it was surprising because most of the respondents who were in the test group said, yeah, this sounds just about right. So the data is here for you. A low budget production is around 2.5 to 3 lakhs. A medium budget production is about 6 lakhs, and a high budget production is about 10.5 to 11 lakhs. So this is on an average, but when we asked them for overall production budgets, it ranged as low as 10,000 and as high as 5 crores. This kind of versatility and variance points to the fact that it points to that informality that we spoke about, right? Because when there are no minimum wage structures in place, when there are no minimum pay structures in place, even for venues paying standard production rates to visiting groups, how does this play out in terms of what kind of income can we rely on in order to invest more in this career? So it does speak to many more other issues that need to be solved for. Since this was conducted somewhere between the second wave and towards the end of the second wave, we asked them about how have they moved their work to the digital domain, and 40% did say that they were able to adapt to the digital domain, but many said that they couldn't and they had to look for alternative careers during that time. Next slide. And finally, some of the recommendations. Next slide. We've broken them down into 3 areas. One was largely to do with training, because it's the art of the possible that was the base of this research for which we were designing this primarily. But within that, we were looking at what are the recommendations that we can give both to the NCPA and to the larger sector to think about training programs. So one was a very clear need of formal long-term training programs, having a platform for sharing and publishing works, hoping that the Art of the Possible website becomes that space to do that, mentoring and formal apprenticeship. This is some of this is what you can also start as individuals, as companies, as venues. What can you do within this to enable deeper training for your teams? Of course, theater seminars and conferences. The second set of recommendations was the institutions, which are potentially venues. How can they, respond to some of the insights that have emerged from the study? Is if all venues can put down a production credit template where you're acknowledging and crediting every single member of your team including all of the transversal skills professionals. That doesn't happen uniformly across the country, and it does play a role in recognizing the legitimacy of careers in this space. Having a post-show feedback form will also allow you to understand how are people responding to the work that is being presented, and the role of the quality of production, the production values, and how that informs people's experience of that. And that also therefore giving evidence base for you to then go back to your funders and ask them for specific areas of investment in specific areas of transversal skills production. Having stronger technical teams, of course. And the last set of recommendations is largely for you. As individuals, what is it that you can do? If you can create templates for everything that you're doing within transversal skills, and that those templates can be shared, can these templates be a part of a database or a repository where all of this can come together? Can there be a repository and a database of all of the professionals, technical skills professionals that we have, so that we can easily reach out to other professionals rather than only relying on references? So the informal way of hiring also tends to be a challenge because it doesn't open up the sector to new entrants. It always becomes about who knows who and because of whom you manage to get into theatre. Social and cultural capital become phenomenally important in building a career in this space. And finally, a need for a practice and participatory research project. How can you look at this research report that is with you and build your own research practices around thinking about technical skills theatre and best practices, and how that can be looped back into the community. Next slide, please. With that, thank you so much. Again, a big thank you to NCPA and the British Council for supporting this. I'd like to hand it over to Bruce.
Thank you very much, Rashmi. It's brilliant to be able to see the fruits of that report actually being put into action here with this programme. And for anybody who wants to read the full report, you can download it from our website, which is aotp.in. If you look up in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you will be able to fill out your details and we will send you a copy of the report. It's also very important that you continue to give us feedback and thoughts and your experiences as well. So if you can take the time to drop us a line in whichever language that you speak from across the country, we would really appreciate it, because all the data that you give us feeds into the art of the possible and how we move forward. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our special guest for today and this session. Shabana Azmi is a multi-award winning, internationally celebrated film and theatre actress. She believes that art should be used as an instrument for social change and has lived up to that ethos during her remarkable career. This makes her the ideal guest to open this Art of the Possible Symposium with us. Shabana, welcome. And where are you today?
Thank you very much, Bruce. I'm in Delhi at the moment.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your really incredibly busy schedule to talk to us about this today. I mean, you as an actress with such a successful career in so many mediums, what is it that draws you back to the theatre and to live performance?
Well, there is nothing quite like the experience of a live performance. The fact is that I was raised in a family where my mother was a very well-known theatre actress, and my father for a long time was the head of Indian People Theatres Association. And so I learned about theatre almost by a process of osmosis. But the fact is that I became a film actor first because I went to the Film and Television Institute of Pune, and inevitably I got drawn to my roots. What makes me come back to theatre is really, it's an experience unlike quite another. The thrill of the live performance, the incredible adrenaline rush that you feel that you might get something wrong and that you don't get a second chance, and also performing to a live audience. It normally happens that when I'm doing a play, even though I've done it many times, the butterflies in my stomach become as huge as elephants. And I think it's that I find exciting. And of course, it is said that film is the director's medium and theatre is the actor's medium. Being an actor, that's what brings me back to theatre. I think ideally for an actor, the best situation would be if you could work in both theater and film.
Absolutely. And why do you feel do you feel like that they inform each other? So the techniques that you use in theater and the techniques that you use in film inform each other?
Oh, absolutely. Because the basic process of developing a character is the same. Depending on how much time you have, theater normally gives you more time. Television doesn't give you any time at all, and film gives you some time. And now, with what is happening in Indian cinema, you're getting more and more time to inhabit the part that you are playing. But the processes are actually the same, of discovering the character and of informing, inhabiting the world. I do think both of them inform each other, and there are different skills that you need to bring into play. For instance, it's said always about theater that you don't get a second chance. But in film, the challenge remains, because when you have a very tight close-up in 75, and if you don't have truth in your eyes, you can get caught. Both of them are thrilling.
Fantastic. So you talk about, and that your belief is that the arts can be used for social change. What do you mean by that?
Well, firstly, I must say that I was brought up in a family which believed that art should be used as an instrument of social change, whether it was Kafi Azmi, my father, or my mother, Kafi. And so it was something in the atmosphere. I believe that art has the possibility of creating a climate of sensitivity in which it is possible for change to occur. So I'm not saying that there's a direct reaction. It's not like a litmus test. But because it has the possibility of creating a climate of sensitivity, and if wherever you are at that point, the penny can drop, and it can become a very important catalyst for change.
Yes. During the pandemic, there were a lot of different visuals that were put out and around and shared by artists, particularly when live performance had stopped. And it was about the recognition is that it's more than just the actor. Well, the actor is the person that everybody sees, or the actors are the people that everybody sees and come to hear in a play, or perform and dance, or perform in opera, or whatever it is. There's actually a huge amount of people underneath the water, and this visual was of an iceberg. So the actor's on the tip of the iceberg, and then underneath the water, you've got these sometimes hundreds of people who go into making a live event happen. Talk a bit about how design and has informed you as an actor and your process. What effect does it have?
You couldn't have said it better. The fact is that acting is a very collaborative medium, and you cannot do it on your own unless you're doing a monologue, and even that requires the script, and it requires the lighting and this, that, and the other. But like you said, often the actor gets away with all the accolades because it's the actor that you see. But actors know that it is because they have a whole host of technicians who are working around them to sort of hide their deficiencies and heighten their strengths, that they are able to give this kind of performance. So for me, in theatre particularly, of course, the director is very important. The writing is the most important thing, absolutely. But the director, the lighting, the sound, the production design, and I think not enough attention is paid to how production design can make things really wonderful for the actor. Because see, as an actor, I react to spaces. That's the first thing that I do. And in the space, because it's about inhabiting the world of a character who may be completely different from mine. Now, if in that production design, I can find things that help me believe the world that I'm inhabiting. Obviously, it's a very big addition. And I think that there's also some misconceptions about design, production design being something very grand and very big. But in other cases, it can be almost invisible. You might not even notice it, but it creates almost subliminally an atmosphere that that sort of just gets into the skin of the actor. And so I have the production design, to me, is not just something that happens in the theater or in the movies, but it informs your aesthetics. And because an actor's basic work is to observe, then I do hope that observing and desiring aesthetics is something that naturally comes to an actor. And I'm not just talking about beauty. I am talking about being in a space where you believe and you are helped into believing that this is the character you have created. I am, as you know, a professionally trained actor, and I was taught the Stanislavski method, in which you should be able to prefix the words "if I were a queen, a slut, a slum dweller, a middle class housewife," any of these things, and you should be able to do them. Now, production design is something that can really, really, really help the actor. I'm saying that selfishly only from my point of view, but also, of course, for the entire experience for the audience.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And just speaking to that is that just that ability for an audience to be able to suspend their disbelief and buy into the world that we've created can be, as Rashmi was talking about, on a 5 crore budget, or, you know, sometimes, you know, on that 10,000 rupee budget. It's all about the kind of likes of the creativity and the ability to be able to think creatively. And I feel like that's something that is quite undervalued, is just that there's quite a practical approach to the way in which we approach events at the moment, and not enough time is maybe given to the creativity aspect of things. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think most people do not even know that there is a difference between art direction and production design. They think that the two are interchangeable. Of course, it's not, because the art director is the person who's putting into place the production design's vision of what it will be. And I think for the whole experience, production design must become a completely professional, a professional skill for which training is required. Most of the time, like Rashmi said, we are learning on the job. And when we are learning on the job, it takes a long, long time. But if you are actually professionally trained for that, my God, that really enhances your ability.
Absolutely. I feel like investment in those kind of key areas and those key skills is actually an investment to save money in the long run, because when you have people who can think about practical problems in a creative way, as well as the people who are creating the designs and the aesthetics, that then you're able to be more cost effective and able to realize ambitious designs on a much, you know, kind of lesser budget than you may well have done if you were just approaching it in a kind of like in ways that are methodologies that are maybe currently being used. And that's not just an India thing. I think that that's a thing kind of across the world.
You see, the whole thing is, what does a theater do? Theater makes the audience willingly suspend their disbelief. Willingly suspend their disbelief. And so I think in theater, the area we really, really need to sort of work on more and focus on more is, how can that be achieved with no money at all? How do you use human beings so that 1 second you believe that I'm a person talking, and the next second you believe that I'm a tree over there? when I watched many years ago Peter Brooks, and he was doing two short plays. One was called Lobu and the other one was called something else. And my eyes just opened because it was the first time that I saw that there was this huge drum. And that drum, as the director wanted, would sometimes become a fortress, would sometimes become a drum, would become just any kind of thing. I find that absolutely fantastic. And that, I think, is the area we really need a lot of looking into. Because otherwise, what tends to happen a lot is if we are only dealing with realism in theater, then we are imitating film. But theater by itself is a different craft. And because we are basing theater on literature, on cinema, on all the elements that you use in cinema, you are not really, getting into the medium and exploring it as fully as I think it deserves.
Absolutely. It's a medium that borrows from everything, and it borrows the best from everything, we hope. Since you brought it up, is that in terms of money and in terms of budgets, I find it remarkable still that we live in a day and age whereby even after the pandemic, where we saw the impact that taking away live arts had on economies, particularly economies as large as India, the arts and crafts sector was really massively hit during the pandemic, and in the UK as well. There was a study that was done that said that for every £1 that was invested by either the government or the Art Council or the lottery or whichever funding bodies were investing it, and I call it investment on purpose, it was generating £6. So that's a 6-to-1 return on what was invested in it. It feels to me like that's something that's undervalued and slightly taken for granted.
Yes, I agree with you, except that I think we should not get limited by finances, because what we need to understand is that the value art can bring is much more than what you can call out in terms of finance. Because when we're talking about the ability of art to transform, it's huge, because we are talking about people's very values being shaken up. We are talking about students being exposed to art that brings such an all-rounded personality that it's not only about academics. When you see value in terms other than just the money, I think that's when we'll really start valuing the arts, which is not to say, of course, that it is also important to point out that actually economically it's a feasible thing, because it brings in so many jobs, it creates tourism, it does all the things that also Rashmi has spoken about.
Absolutely. And just finally, because I'm just aware of time and that you are incredibly busy and have been joining us here, but just finally, what would you like to see happen? You've heard what Rashmi said. We've had several conversations about this. What do you think needs to be addressed, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, I think what this seminar is trying to do is so important, and I'm so delighted to be a part of it. Because it says the art of the possible. I think we deal all the time with, oh, this is impossible, that can't happen, this can't happen. So the fact that we are bringing together a community that is so disparate and not necessarily connected with each other, how important is community? A strong community creates social connections. And for us to get together as theatre practitioners and audiences, I think is such a wonderful idea, and it might take time, but at least we've started. And for that, I would like to congratulate Antonia, and of course, all the others, and thank British Council and NCPA.
Thank you so much for your time. And on that lovely note, as we're going to finish, I could speak to you all day, but I know that you can't. So thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity as well, just to say thanks again to Shabana Azmi for joining us, and to say thank you to our partners on Art of the Possible, the British Council, and to Godrej as well, who are sponsoring here, and the initiative and the website, which will be getting launched at the end of this. I'm going to hand you back to Antonia. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, wasn't that an amazing conversation? I'm just in awe of her. I think she's incredible, and it was really fantastic to hear her thoughts on our initiative as well. Okay, so what happens next? Right. I promised I was going to give you some more details about some of the things that we've got coming up. And if you're not registered for the actual rest of the symposium, then go to the website now and register, and then you'll get sent all the Zoom links. So next up, I'm hosting a panel about collaborative working practices and what does that actually mean? And I'm working with some really great colleagues as we talk about that. And then later this evening, we have the Mixer, the social event. And if you go to the website, you'll see what that's all about. We've got 7 producers and directors who are going to come together, and they're going to be in a Zoom room in pairs, and then you can go and meet them and talk to them about your work and what you do. It's the equivalent of being at a social networking event, but just on Zoom. And then tomorrow we've got a whole full day of schedule. So have a look at the website and yeah, come and join us. Look on social media. I will see you at 4:30 where we'll be talking about collaborative practice. Thank you so much for joining us, and come join our community.